Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest this episode is Rajiv Kulkarni from Adobe. So Rajiv, if you could give a little bit of background on yourself.
Yep, thanks, Tony. Hey, everyone. My name is Rajiv. I'm a senior security engineer at Adobe, and I'm in the incident response team, which is the blue team. And my main interests are malware analysis, reverse engineering, and all the other things security.
All right. The reason I have you on is I wanted to talk about the malware analysis pipeline that you guys have built inside of Adobe. And we've done I've done a couple other podcasts in the past with Adobe, and in a similar vein of within Adobe, you guys seem to often find things that are challenges for which there doesn't seem to be an off-the-shelf product that will solve your problem, and therefore, Adobe just innovates and comes up with a home-brewed solution that addresses it. That seems to be basically the malware analysis pipeline. Is there was an issue, you guys identified the issue, and then said, okay, well, how can we solve this issue since there doesn't seem to be a tool off the shelf that's going to do it for us? So. Starting from there, why don't you just give a kind of a high-level overview of like what is the malware analysis pipeline?
Yeah, sure. So we built this malware analysis pipeline, and in a nutshell, what this does is we get a lot of unseen files in our environment every day, and there was no way to. Currently, there was no way to analyze all these files and trying to decide whether if it's a benign file or if it's something malicious that we should take a further look at. And so what we did was we took we automated the process of analyzing all the unknown binaries, and we built a pipeline that extracts all these binaries from our SIM and submits it to malware sandboxes. And these sandboxes would help us classify all the vast amount of files that we see on a daily basis.
Okay. So when these unknown binaries are, you have a process to automatically send them to the sandbox environment and classify them. Clarify for me what that means. Like, what are the possible classifications? What is it classifying them as?
Sure. So there are like several terms in the industry, but overall, the possible classifications would be that a binary is either malicious or a malware or benign, or there's something called a grayware or a pup, which is a potentially unwanted program. So those are things that malicious actors could use, but they are not outrightly malicious by themselves. So something like Netcat, which is a popular network utility, but having that is not very bad in general, but it could be used for nefarious purposes. So malware, benign, and grayware.
Okay. Yeah, because I would say there are tools like that where it's like in and of itself it's not malicious, it's very useful, but it really comes down to then understanding the context of who is using it and why. It's like in the right hands, it's a great tool. In the wrong hands, it's also could be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there, do you ever run into situations where there's a binary that can't be properly classified for some reason? Like if the malware analysis pipeline, if the automated process can't properly classify it, like how are those handled? Or are they flagged so that someone else can look at it?
We do have even from the automated sandbox, there is one category which is unknown, which the sandbox couldn't determine what it was. And so in our process, we have two stages. So we do the classification using one sandbox, and then based on some filters that we have, we send a few more files from to the next stage. And the second stage sandbox does the classification as well. And as you mentioned, like there are a few cases where both the stages are not able to classify a file, and those are the unknowns. And um, typically what we do is we look at some more context around the file. So since we have our EDR tooling deployed, we also look at what other events are there around that file. And if it's deemed necessary, then we would then proceed to do a manual reverse engineering work. That's the fun part. And then we try to make the determination if it's actually malicious or not.
I'm gonna say you're right. So that's the fun part. That's the part you want to do. So secretly, you're probably hoping that some of those come through because it gives you something fun to do.
Nothing more fun than staring at assembly all day.
Right. While this is going on, okay, so ostensibly, someone at Adobe is trying to do something. They've clicked on something. They're trying to execute something. Whatever is going on that kind of triggers this automated process, and the malware analysis pipeline is looking at this binary to figure out, okay, how do I classify this? What do I do? What's happening in the meantime with the binary? Like, is it held? Is it prevented from executing outside of the sandbox until there's a decision made?
The sheer amount of new binaries that we see, it's practically impossible to quarantine the binary as quarantine every new binary that we see until we make a decision. So it's mostly transparent to the user. So if there's a new binary seen on user's laptop, it comes to the malware pipeline in the backend, but the user doesn't know anything. And once the binary goes through the stages, comes out of the pipeline with a valid classification, then the SOC would come in and do the triage if it was deemed malicious, and only then the user would be notified.
Okay. Is there a defined, like, do you guys have like a defined timeline or an SLA for making that determination? And as an added thought, what have you encountered any situations, or are you concerned that you could encounter a situation where, let's say it's not a really good example because ransomware doesn't really work like that so much anymore, but let's say it's a ransomware, so something gets through and someone executes something, it's ransomware, but in the, whether it's 2 minutes or 2 hours, in the time frame it takes you to classify it, it's already encrypted the system or whatever, so I'm throwing a lot out there. One question is there a defined timeline or SLA for making these determinations? And the other is just, okay, but what if the damage is fast and not easily undone?
Okay. So we run this pipeline as a batch job every hour. So that's like the average time that it takes to make the determination. So by the time the next batch begins, we would already have the verdicts for the previous batch. And as I mentioned, like, we get enormous amounts of binaries. So for example, the last week we saw 16,000 binaries that were submitted to the first stage of the analysis. So that's why we have this batch processing, and we do not make any immediate decisions. And to answer your second question, like if it was a ransomware, like we do have other controls in place. Like we do have EDR running on a lot of the machines, and we follow the defense in depth practices. So we have firewalls and everything. So by the time the ransomware gets to the point where it's about to be executed, like it would have to cross multiple barriers, and so that's a major point of our defense.
Okay. In terms of how, so when a binary is determined to be malicious or maybe even grayware, in terms of how it's handled, do you have a different process in terms of if it's found on a server or in the cloud versus on an individual workstation?
No, we follow similar process, but depending on we tend to further classify. Like once it's classified as malware, we also look at what malware family it is, and based on that, we may handle it differently on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, if we determine it to be a coin miner, we handle it one way, versus if we determine it to be a ransomware, then we handle it in a different manner. But nothing specific to like whether we discover it on a user laptop or a server.
Okay. You mentioned, and I think it would have been a fair assumption even if you didn't mention it, but obviously Adobe has other security controls and tools in place throughout the environment. And you mentioned EDR. I'm not going to ask you to name names on what vendors or whatever you're using, but
yeah.
What are the limitations as you see them with the current EDR tools? Like why couldn't the current EDR tools have addressed this issue for you?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that we get from EDR is threat intel, and we get really good threat intel from the current EDR tools that we have. And with that, the limitation is we would know all the known knowns. So we would know all the known malicious files. But if there's any unknown binary, then an EDR tool wouldn't be able to make that determination solely based on the threat intel. So either it would have to rely on the behavioral analysis, and this is where we saw the need to build this malware pipeline, because we wanted not to be limited with the intel that the EDR tool was giving. We wanted to do the static and dynamic analysis on the binary ourselves. And we wanted more control while doing that. So that's where the malware pipeline comes in, and that's one of the limitations that we saw for the EDR.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, when I was first kind of looking into the malware analysis pipeline and what you guys are doing, that was really kind of the first thing that came to mind was, okay, doesn't this seem like something the EDR tools should do, or aren't there EDR vendors out there who have some version of this that's part of the tool? That was the first question I had. Right. But I'm curious. So I don't know if we talked about like when you started building the malware analysis pipeline, or when you implemented using it, but prior to that, and prior to kind of launching this project, how did you deal with those limitations then, or did you just, or was it just an area of concern? You knew that there were these unknown binaries and you didn't have a solution for it.
So this was a constantly evolving problem, and before the pipeline, we did have different kinds of different ways of determining, and some of the at maybe not at this scale that we are performing, 16,000 binaries per week, but we did have our own deployment of a sandbox, and we tried to send some of the binaries through that to make a determination, and we relied also on external thread feeds and whatever determination the EDR tooling could provide us. But we wanted more, we wanted more reliable verdicts, and we wanted more control over what features that we can extract on binaries. So that's when we started to think about building this pipeline.
Okay. Are there, if they asked you, if some vendor called you up and asked you, like, what do you think EDR vendors should be doing? Like, what features or capabilities are missing? Well, actually, I think this is sort of a two-part question. One is, is EDR even the solution? I mean, there could be other tools outside of EDR that maybe are better, but from a security vendor, like if you were looking to buy these capabilities instead of building it in-house,
Right.
what do you think vendors need to be doing that they're not doing now?
Right. EDR is definitely a good solution for a lot of our requirements, but it's no silver bullet. And a good EDR solution needs to do a lot of things, and it needs to do them well. Coming from an incident response perspective, what I would want from a good EDR is data around various events, and for example, to go into a little bit more deeper, I would want to look at process execution events and process trees and command lines and libraries loaded and whatnot. And coming from a network perspective, what are the IPs and ports that a binary is talking to, and or a machine is talking to, and if it's reaching out to any external IPs and ports and so on. And also, like, a good EDR tool needs to have the ability to perform forensics and real-time response. And so all this comes with a good EDR. And what I want additionally, which is why we ended up building our own homegrown solution, was the ability to perform malware analysis using this is one of the reasons why we chose two different solutions for our sandboxes as well, because each has its own unique capabilities. And ideally, we would want the EDR to have that capability to plug in a different sandbox, and or to plug in your own solution where you can extract, you can try to determine whether a file is malware or not using your own methods, and perform experiments there and whatnot. So yeah, it was kind of a lengthy answer to your question, but I hope that that suffices it.
Well, and I mean, as you were talking too, I was thinking, well, the simple answer, or the assumed answer, even if I never asked the question, would be, well, I would hope that EDR vendors would have a malware analysis pipeline that they would just build the same thing, but as part of the tool. Or so you could either have an EDR vendor that says, okay, look, we're gonna incorporate this. We're gonna have a sandbox environment where it funnels things over here and it runs them in the sandbox and then makes a determination and escalates that to the team.
Right.
In addition, you could have an EDR vendor that said, either we're going to do that, or we're going to have the hooks in the integration to make it simple for you to plug in other sandbox tools, and and maybe some of that exists on some level already, but that might even be a better answer than having the EDR vendor kind of build their own and kind of locking you into, okay, well, if I buy this EDR tool, now I have to use their sandbox. It might be even better to have the ability to just tie in other sandbox tools.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even the EDR vendors are, I'm sure, like it must be in their pipeline to build these integrations as well, because I see that like just the way we face this issue, I could also see a lot, many other companies facing similar issues. So, yeah.
Yeah. Are there, I guess my question is, what are you working on now? Like, what are you working on, either to evolve and improve the malware analysis pipeline, or additional, projects to address other challenges now that you have the malware analysis pipeline? Like, what's next on the horizon?
Yeah, sure. So one thing is, like, we have the malware analysis pipeline deployed, and it's getting data and feeding data back for the SOC team to analyze. And one thing that I want to check is its health, like whether if is it identifying whether the classifications that are being made are accurate. And I also want to keep a check on the amount of false positives and see if it's missing anything. So that's an active area that I'm working on, like, to gather statistics and try to do some analysis on them. And also sometime in the future, even these sandboxes may have some limitations, and some like an advanced nation state malware might slip through. So we want to be sure that that is not the case. So on top of this sandbox, we also want to have something on our own that will try to catch even the most advanced malware.
Okay. You mentioned, a couple of minutes ago that that EDR vendors, probably / hopefully are working on some of these things, because obviously Adobe is not the only company in the world, facing that challenge or wanting to address that issue. Along those lines, when Adobe does these, in-house homegrown projects, they're great and they work great for Adobe. But is it something that you think other organizations can, implement or aspire to? I mean, should other organizations also be building a malware analysis pipeline?
Yeah, definitely. I feel other organizations should be building something like this if they aren't working on similar things already. And they should definitely be able to leverage various open source tooling available to build such a similar solution. So for example, I would assume that all the organizations would have some sort of a log aggregator or a SIM. So that would be the main source of data, like the source for all the new binaries that are being observed. And one could use one could write their own scripts using, say, Python or whatever, or and they could deploy their own pipeline. And one could also use their own malware sandbox. Cuckoo Sandbox is a very popular open source tool that one could deploy, and that would give similar verdicts, and it's highly customizable, and it has a lot of good plugins. So definitely other organizations should be able to do something like this.
Okay, you kind of already mostly answered my follow-on question, which is, Adobe's a large company. You have more resources than most in terms of people and tools and such. So my question was going to be, but if you're not a company the size and you don't have the resources of Adobe, could you still do this? But you mentioned open source, which I think is great. I still that I think there's still a little bit of there's still a bar there. Like you still have to have someone in your organization that understands enough to take the open source tool and do something with it. So I think there are still, you'd still have organizations out there that don't even have those skills on their team to do that part, who really need, going back to our earlier part of the conversation, they really need the EDR vendors to build something, because they just need to be able to buy something off the shelf that does it, because they, not every company has the resources inside to build something.
Right. Yeah. And as we discussed, like hopefully EDR vendors are trying to integrate these solutions in their product as well.
All right. All right. Well, I think that's about all the questions I have on, the malware analysis pipeline. Like I said, I think that it makes sense, why you need it, and I think it sounds like a fairly elegant solution. I think it also, nice to have it be automated. That I think is a key thing for almost any solution nowadays, is especially because of the volume you mentioned. It's like if you had to try to do anything manual with 16,000 binaries every week, that is an untenable situation.
Yeah.
But I guess we can kind of wrap up there. But I will extend my hope that your malware analysis pipeline misses at least a few of them, so that you have something to reverse engineer.
Yeah, or I could, we could build a pipeline so good that could just end the reverse engineering field forever. Well,
that is certainly a lofty goal, but one worthy of aspiring to. So, thank you for taking the time to join the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tony, for having me here.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed, or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.